So there was a competition among writers once on the Parr Show because Jane Mansfield was on, booked on. And Jack was so thrilled. I'd never seen him quite so excited since Noel Coward came on a couple of years earlier. And Jane was a huge star then. It was almost like getting Marilyn, but she never was, achieved Marilyn's status. But it was a big, big booking. And Jack was just thrilled. And he said, I got to get the perfect introduction. And we wrote introductions, and he didn't like them. And we wrote introductions for Jane again, never done that before, and he didn't like any of them, and say, you guys keep giving me stuff I can't use. You haven't given me lines I could use in 3 weeks, which was crazy, of course we had. And in my self-jeopardizing way, I offered to say, I can bring you the carbons, Jack, of what you used last night. Anyway, as you can see, I had a self-destructive streak. But finally, we all got sick of it, and I just went up to the typewriter and wrote, here they are, Jane Mansfield. And this became one of the most famous lines of the decade. Parr got the longest laugh I think he'd ever gotten with it, and maybe less popular with some of the older writers.
Now, did you ever use that line yourself in your talk shows?
I couldn't really, because I didn't have the opportunity. I mean, it didn't apply to anybody quite as well as it did Jane Mansfield.
Well, talk about the morning talk show. We're in '68. How do you conceive of a 90-minute talk show, and how do you do it day in and day out?
We don't ever, you don't dare think of how long it is, or the odds against doing it well, how great they are, or how you're going to shift from one guest to the next, and how you're going to remember what you want to say, and whether you dare say it or not, and what it is you just thought of and then forgot while the guest was talking, and now you've forgotten not only what it was, but what the guest is talking about. And then you get a big unexpected laugh and wonder what you said. And it just 1,000 little ladyfinger firecrackers are going off in your brain all over the place. While on camera, you look perfectly calm. When you watch it later, you don't look neurotic. You don't see your twitches. You don't see your anxieties and fears. And the camera lies in your favor. That crap about television camera being an X-ray camera that reveals the truth is such crapola. I think that's the proper Italian pronunciation. I've sat with the biggest phonies in the world and thought the audience is just going to laugh at how phony they obviously are. And by God, they aren't when you see it. So I later learned to point it out for those who might have missed it. And I don't remember who the guest was. I once said, did you manage to hear any of what I had asked you? I can't remember who that was. I think it was the son of I think it was a member of the Roosevelt family, but it doesn't matter much, does it?
Now, your first show had Angela Lansbury, Muhammad Ali, and Gore Vidal. Is that the sort of conversation that you...
Did it?
Yeah.
My God, you're right. Angela Lansbury, Muhammad Ali, and Gore Vidal. Wow, that's right.
Is that a perfect dinner party for you?
Yes, it would be for anybody, I would think. By the way, if anybody ever offers you any of those daytime shows, the network thoughtfully reused the tape to tape Let's Make a Deal. And I found this out too late. Some idiot in my employ failed to, a lawyer perhaps, to tell them don't erase the shows or ditch them. And it's one of the saddest things in my life because always I'm thinking of one more thing that was there. A whole show with Groucho and the great Harry Ruby, great friends, and Ruby was a fabulous personality. Actors that were never ever seen again or before on talk shows. Robert Ryan, George Sanders, Gail Sondergaard, Fred Clark, people that everybody recognizes from the movies. That sort of thrill that they're not huge stars, but when they walk out, everybody goes, oh, him, yes, I've seen him 100 times. I used to like to get those people on.
Now, this was a morning show. This was a great intellectual daytime show.
And people wrote in saying, we can't believe this. Thank God a friend told me about it. The network never promotes it. Nobody knows it's there. It's a shame. We know it's going to go off. What can we do? You know.
Now, how did you put together your writing staff, having been a writer for Parr and Carson?
I knew people that I had kind of grown up with, and I knew David Lloyd, and I knew Marshall Brickman, and a couple of other guys, Tom Whedon and Dave Axelrod came along that I didn't know, and that's how it works.
Now, what did you think of your monologue? What did you want to do with it?
I just assumed you have to do a monologue. It never occurred to me until years later, why not just come out and start the show? And some people would suggest that the day after the monologue bombed. But I did try to emulate Johnny's being able to turn a bombing line into a laugh. When I watched myself do them, I saw Bob Hope in me, I saw Woody in me, I saw Benny in me at times. Even when you watch Johnny, you will see many of those same people in gestures and movements of the eyes and shifting your weight a certain way, like Bob Hope did after a line. Hey, how about that? Isn't that something? Yeah. The monologue is a dreadful burden, and it goes all the way back to Jack's reason I got to sit in this chair. That he hated worrying about his monologue, and I tried to help him.
And you also tried to make your talk show relevant. It was 1968. So many things are happening on the outside world, and you
that was a hell of a time. I didn't. It was just, there was one assassination after another, and Chicago riots, and the Chicago riot, Grant Park, cost the world the 5th installment of the great Bob and Ray allegedly covering the convention from Chicago, though it was backstage in my studio. They did 4 of them, hilariously, and then the 5th one, the riots were the night before, and I had to come out and say, I'm afraid Chicago became a very unfunny place last night, and Bob and Ray won't be here.
They were sort of doing a Jon Stewart sort of thing.
In a way it was, yeah. It was unusual to have a philosopher on the show, though I certainly was not fool enough to ever try to do intellectual television, as if there could be such a thing.
And obviously the show got great reviews, but it was canceled a year later. Could you just talk about how it came to an end?
I don't remember its coming to an end exactly in terms of days and final shows or anything. I just remember thinking, God, I got what I wanted, apparently. It lasted longer than I thought it would. A lot of television careers last 4.5 weeks. And I got to do a show and was contented and strangely and relieved that I could have a little free time now, maybe for a change. And then I was sitting in the 3rd row of a theater in London, and a woman tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Congratulations." And I said, "For what?" And she said, "You're replacing Joey Bishop." And I said, have you been drinking? And she said, "No, it's true. It's in the news." I didn't know it, but it turned out to be true.
But before
or if
that,
it wasn't true, I've did a lot of strange stuff all those years.
But before that, in the summer, you sort of were a precursor to what Jay Leno is going to do.
That's
next year.
yeah.
You did 3 nights a week on ABC.
3 odd nights, like they would not come trippingly on the tongue,
right?
Which is always misquoted as off the tongue. But if we start apologizing to Shakespeare, will you? It's very strange. Somebody said, "We're going to try you in the summer at 10 o'clock." But they didn't have the guts to do it 5 nights a week, which might have been a very much different outcome. Because I remember Brickman and I, Marshall was saying, well, somebody ought to have the brains to put a talk show on prime time across the board. So much crap on television. It's almost all crap. As in any art form, is mostly crap, and the cream is at the top. And people who never see talk shows, well, now they're all around the dial, but I mean, people who never saw a late night show, and there were many, ever saw one, could see one then. So in the summer, it pleased a lot of people, but it was so irregular. Groucho came on and said, you have to have a secretary to know when the damn show is on. So then I went back to...
And the summer shows were interesting because you dealt with a lot with the Hollywood legends in your morning show. But the summer show was right around the time of Woodstock, and you were meeting the counterculture. What was that like to have shows with Janis Joplin and Jimi Hendrix?
Well, it wasn't like anything because I'd never done anything like it before and didn't know if there was anything like it. I do remember the embarrassment on the daytime show of my producer when a rock number ended 10 feet from me saying, "We're short, go talk to Grace Slick." And I said, "Which one is Grace Slick?" I apologize again to her now. But then, in those days, I didn't know nothing from that sort of thing. Now, there's a DVD out there called Rock Icons from the Dick Cavett show, and everybody was on, except Hendrix, who's on a separate one.
Yeah.
But that Woodstock night, that show has become kind of a archived cult item show, where Crosby, Stills, Nash and others came right from Woodstock there. Hendrix was supposed to, but was still on stage at 9 in the morning and slept for 48 hours and did the show 2 shows later to make up for it. But yeah, I got introduced into the rock world, of which I knew nothing. My friend Chris Porterfield took me down to the Fillmore one night when he was working for Time, and he had to do something down there. And after the concert, I said, "The girl in the tight, beautiful green corduroy or velvet pants, his name was what again?" And he said, "Janis Joplin." And I thought, God, is she going to get anywhere with that weird-sounding name? As you know, she did. I loved Janis. She did the show, I think, 5 times. One entire disc on the DVD set is Janis. And to show you how we mentioned about that, the world of rock, how a bit out of it I was. Not only did she make fun of my shoes on the air as not being very hip, but I took her to Elaine's trendy place one night, and everybody's blasé in Elaine's, but when Janis came in her feathers and everything from the show, people stopped in mid-gesture and looked. And we sat down at a table for 2, and she said, "Oh, that's nice." I said, "What?" She said, "They're playing one of my songs." Somebody, seeing her come in, had dropped a quarter or whatever. And I said, "What's it called?" And she said, "Down on Me." And I said, "I guess that's one you don't sing on television." She said, "It's a religious song. The light of heaven comes down on me," and all that. I dropped my menu to cover my blush and went under the table. Oh, I knew that, Janet. Or Janice, is it? Which is it, Janet? Janice.
Well, could you talk about the
I called her Janet once, and she struck me.
Now, could you talk about the late night show? You replaced Joey Bishop. What was it like to go up against Johnny Carson?
I don't have any idea, because it never occurred to me for an instant that I was up against Johnny Carson. I didn't know he was on. But I just thought, this is another chance I get to be on for a while. And anything I ever did in television I thought would last, and nothing ever totally does it? Except Johnny on the late night show, and even he. But no, I just knew that, oh, here's something that may only have been revealed somewhere once. The late Irving Lazar, known as Swifty, the fabulous agent, played in what movie recently that I saw him in?
Frost Nixon.
Oh, in the Frost Nixon, that's right, of course. They must have gotten his old plate glasses. Driving up to his house one night, he said, "Johnny said to me once, don't tell him I told you this. I feel that statute has run out by now, as everybody else is dead. Cavett's the only one who could beat me. And if he had been on a station, on a network with a full station lineup, he might well have." And I was speechless. And I started thinking, I wonder how that and how much he likes me fit together. It isn't just that he and I are from Nebraska, though that did create a kind of bond, I guess. When I first met Brendo, it was over the phone for 3 hours. And he said, I'm from Nebraska too, aren't you? And I said, yes. He said, I feel a kind of foolish kinship with you. How many actors use phrases like a foolish kinship? It could be from Midsummer Night's Dream or something. Brando used the language very well. But I think our being from Nebraska, weirdly enough, and Johnny's being from Nebraska, but to stop sliding off your question, I can't imagine that I had to try to convince anybody that it never occurred to me I was going to knock Johnny off the air. Or even make a perceptible dent in a show that, again, in those days I used to say it's as simple as ABC. ABC didn't promote very much and so on, but viewers canned to cotton to it and grow and grow. So, somebody said to me once, don't ever let them create the impression you lost money for ABC. You made money for them. And when they decided they could make more of it on a dumb idea called The Wide World of Entertainment, which ended up having me in it, Jack Parr in it, and alternating weeks, again, bad programming schedule of totally other stuff, and junky clapped together Beatles specials and Beatles film glued together shows and stuff, and it was just they failed to make money on that. Tee-hee.
Now we have a section called interviewing style. How would you define
what?
Interviewing style? How would you define your interviewing style?
Well, first of all, I refuse to be categorized as you just have categorized me, and it's not personal, we'll be friends again someday. But don't be cute, Dick. The greatest advice I ever got and anyone would ever get about doing a talk show came from Jack Parr, who, when it was about to happen, and after he had complained that I was starting at more money than he made when he left The Tonight Show, and I don't know how much that was. No one believes me. I've never, ever wanted to know how much money I was making on anything. Isn't that weird? I remember when TV Guide said, Jack Parr, they're very fond of Jack at NBC. They have raised, as I was still in Nebraska, they have raised him to $3,000 a week. A fortune in those days. Anyway, Jack said his advice was, kid, don't do interviews. That means clipboards and David Frost and what's your favorite color, and make it a conversation. I realized that's what Jack did. He never said, what's your pet peeve? The unavoidable interview question of every junior high school girl who's a journalist, what's your pet peeve? I said to one once, nuclear war. But seriously, folks.
But
it's conversation. You don't want to. What's your favorite color? What's your most wonderful movie? What's the best film you ever made? Where we, And Jack was right. When you get guests out there and you're talking, you forget there's a commercial coming.
How do you prepare then for a conversation, we'll say, with Katharine Hepburn or Orson Welles?
Well, Hepburn pulled a dirty trick by saying, why don't we just do it now?
Yeah, right.
And so we did, after ordering the stagehands around in that wonderful moment, which I secretly taped. A scary thing to have done. I just put down anything I think I might want to hear them talk about and try to go out there and remember it or have notes that I can see.
Were there any pre-interviews done?
Yeah, almost every talk show has somebody call the guest, and if it's Peter Ustinov, who exemplified the best talk show guest ever, or someone like that, you obviously don't say, what do you want to talk about? Well, you will. They might say, I just took a trip to Washington for this, and I want to talk about that. But, yeah, there's what's called first called a talent coordinator, then it was called a segment producer, I don't know what it's called now, that will get with the guest to whatever degree is possible or necessary and give you some notes. he'd rather not talk about the incident about the park because it's a lawsuit right now and he doesn't dare talk about it. And you get some warnings like that, and I didn't always obey guests' desire not to talk about something there was no reason for them not to talk about.
Like what?
I wish I could remember one now. I remember the feeling. I can't come up. The one that I thought of, just a minor incident, was as I was saying to Robert De Niro on the PBS show, someone said, any doctor who said it's okay for you to put on 80 pounds, as you did in that, to play Jake LaMotta, is crazy. And then I realized it had said in the notes he's been asked too much about that and would rather not talk about it. So I felt I betrayed him on the air. It wasn't that I insisted on it, I forgot. But there are times when I would just think, well, if they're going to come on, it's going to look like I'm afraid to ask them about certain things.
How difficult is it to have a conversation, we'll say, with a Hollywood legend like Fred Astaire and someone from the counterculture like John Lennon? Are they sort of the same sort of thing?
In each case, you just have to trust to adjusting to them. And I seem to have a knack for that, because it would be that people who had either never done talk shows before or those who had done many talk shows before would say, this is the easiest it's ever been. I didn't even feel like I was doing a show, as a compliment. And I don't know where that comes from. I guess it's just something I'm lucky to have, and makes up for many things I don't have.
And there's the one infamous show that we've talked about at the Paley Center, the show with Norman Mailer, Gore Vidal, and Janet Flanner. Could you just...
There's never been a show like that. It's quite possible it will never be surpassed in terms of its particular terms. Here were three literary figures, an unlikely thing to entertain viewers in most people's mind, who clashed brilliantly and entertainingly and somewhat bitterly for 90 minutes that was on the edge of one's chair. And the great Janet Flanner, whom people mostly had not heard of, who wrote under the pseudonym Genet, the Paris letter in the New Yorker for 35, 40 years, turned out to be a great, great personality who wrapped the formidably and drunken Norman Mailer around her little white-gloved finger so deftly and so beautifully. And Norman came on to gut Gore Vidal about something he'd written in the New York Review of Books. So the conflict was all there and ready to go. And
is that something you aspire to? Do you like the conflict, or
I loved every minute of that. It was tense. It was hard, tough going. It looked like there might be physical violence at one point, or 2 points, a thing Norman was not entirely unfamiliar with. Vidal was just so elegantly eloquent. Once the audience applauded a sentence of Gore's, largely because it was so elegantly constructed, that it, like a piece of music, it created a kind of appreciative thrill. I can almost do it. It was, with apologies to him, but it was almost this. It was, Norman said at one point, hey, Gore, why don't you, can't you just talk to me, instead of having me play the audience all the time? Can't you just talk to me, Gore? And Gore, not knowing that was going to be said, well, Norman, because we don't happen to find ourselves in the friendly neighborhood bar, but by election in front of a studio audience, it would be dishonest to pretend otherwise. I think that was it. And yay! Part of the applause was, of course, they were mad at Norman, a large part of the audience.
And some of your shows...
I told him to fold it 5 ways and put it where the moon don't shine. And that's often misquoted as stick it, which would be vulgar. And he had said to me, why don't you read another question off the question sheet? And I thought, I'm not David Frost. I mean, I'm not certain talk show host. And that made me mad. And I said, why don't you, etc. I had to translate that for a German audience in Berlin. Falten Sie es 5-mal und stecken Sie es dabei, wo der Mond nicht scheint.
And Mailer did ask, did you have that line prepared? Was it something that you had
Oh,
used
it's Cavett. Is that something you've had canned for years?
Yeah, right.
He kept trying to come in with the applause wouldn't stop and the laughter. Something you've had canned for years, something you've been waiting to lay it on. And I heard myself say, I have to tell you a quote from Tolstoy. Well, that got another huge laugh. Went on like that.
Yeah.
We all were, well, Gore and Norman were not great friends. It was interesting to see a show in which a guest as eminent as Vidal and eminent as Flatter and eminent as Maley, to hear one of them, Gore, say, okay, I'll tell you what I detest about you, Norman, and went on to do so. Your love of violence, your glamorization of murder, the country has had quite enough of it. It was really interesting.
And then there's some shows that weren't, we'll say, that dynamic with people at the time, but then have an importance 30 years later, like your show with John Kerry and John O'Neill, which was excerpted when Kerry ran for the presidency.
Yeah, it's interesting. That came flaring back to life in the convention. Young John Kerry and young John O'Neill, and there was the Lester Maddox show, a name that people now may have to think for a moment who Lester Maddox was. But in those days, it was like Jack getting Jane Mansfield, Lester Maddox, or my getting John Lennon and Yoko. He was a big, hot media name, front pages of the New York Times, waving a big, long handle at keeping certain people out of his Pickwick chicken restaurant. And he loved the fact that every journalist talked about his waving an axe handle at black people. And he said, I never did that in my life, and I never would do it in my life. It was a pick handle. What else was it? Well, that was a show where you talk about booking three prominent people. Would you think maybe trouble might arise if you booked not only the racist governor of Georgia, prominent in the news, but with him Jim Brown, the giant football player and black man, and Jim Capote? After the governor left, when I wouldn't apologize to the people of Georgia in the way he said I had insulted them, finally saying, all right, Governor, if I've called anyone a bigot who isn't a bigot, I apologize. And he left at that point. By the way, politicians know television, and they knew the value of television time. And so Lester showed how smart he was by walking off a scant 88 minutes into a 90-minute show. And afterwards, Truman picked on him a little bit when he wasn't there to defend himself by saying that he had gone down there and he had been in Lester's Pickwick chicken restaurant and that he had sampled the wares and it wasn't finger-licking good.
Now, what is it like to do conversations with your friends, we'll say Groucho and Woody Allen? How do you approach a television show with people you know on the outside?
It's easier. In a way, it might be harder because you think, we have no problem talking when we're together, but will we stiffen up out there or be afraid we're going to embarrass the other one or bring up something we shouldn't? But I found Woody came on a lot, helping me on my first days of talk show in the daytime. Other time, I don't know how many times, 8 or 9 times more. And I always looked forward to it, and it was always fun when he was out there because it's like it's here us together against them, and Groucho was just the treasure of my life. I mean, getting to know him was everything. He loved doing the show. I had heard that he'd discovered the daytime show and told his friends in Hollywood, who mostly weren't actors because Groucho was a born writer, a great reader, self-educated. From childhood, he had 4 or 5 books around. And so he liked writers. So once he took me to the legendary Hillcrest Country Club, there they were, card poker game over there with Lee Marvin and Edward G. Robinson and every place you look. And we sat with the writers, Nat Perrin and all the Hollywood writers. And I heard that he had told them to watch this guy on daytime television that they had, and his great friend Harry Ruby, who wrote Three Little Birds, and that Groucho would like to come on the show, but didn't quite know how to go about it. Somehow we got it.
Right.
Thank God that ended quickly. And you know, some people later said, you know, you did something for those people. And I honestly said, what do you mean? They said, well, you know, you did a lot for Groucho. His career wasn't in great shape at that point. The game show had long ended. Right. And some people were beginning to forget Groucho. And Hepburn. I said, what can I do for Groucho Marx and Katharine Hepburn, having come from 23rd Street in Lincoln, Nebraska? So we did a lot. And did it ever occur to you that they might have wanted to come on with you? Astaire hoped someone would have him get on with me. I don't think this is false modesty. It's something else. I never could conceive of certain people being anybody I could do something for. It's the other way around. They do something for me by being in The African Queen or A Night at the Opera.
Could you talk about the transition to PBS and how that show arose from?
I didn't think of going to PBS as much of a transition, really, because essentially you do the same thing. You sit out there with someone and try to make it as interesting as possible for yourself, which often translates into for the viewer.
Right.
And I certainly never tried to appeal to a PBS audience, right. Whatever that might be, since people, many claim somewhat snobbishly, I think, oh, if I watch any television at all, it's only PBS. Well, PBS can be as dismally boring as any other television, but has an awful lot of good stuff. Right. So you're going to get more good stuff there, that's for sure. But
how did the experience differ from your network years?
It didn't differ in any really great ways. There was not what I believe is called the chicken shit factor of people at the network always saying, I'm not sure you can do that. Woman is the nigger of the world is the name of a song that Yoko wrote, and ABC, after John and Yoko came back, and they were thrilled that I got them on the show, and the ratings were... And I said, they said, that song isn't going to play. And I said, yes, it is. Why not say that? You know, how did I know it? Right. And the shaking man from the network said, well, we just can't allow that. And I said, well, I get the big booking of the year at that point, John and Yoko, and you're going to censor them? Who else do you think we'll get after you do that? And I made other sophistic arguments. Finally, they shook a while and decided overnight, since I don't know how I managed to say in front of someone from the press that someone was planning to censor this show. How could I have been so tactless? But so a lot of publicity came out about ABC planning to censor it. So they came up with a compromise, which is that I would tape a little intro bit of tape to it. And I said, oh, God, what? Well, you know, just, you know, we all want everybody to be happy here. And so it was just something along the lines of, we'll write it out for you. You know, we're all adults, and some people might be offended. And, I mean, it's not our intent to offend anybody. So I did this stupid thing to save the song. And they played it. And I think about 600 and some protests did come in. None of them about the song. All of them about, as one woman put it, that mealy-mouthed little played-down-to-us apology you made Dick Cavett do in front of the song. How infantile do you think we are? Will networks ever treat any of their viewers as adults? They don't deserve to have any. I mean, there were eloquent letters came in about this. Nobody complained about woman is the nigger of the world. And is anything sillier in our day and age than grown people saying the words, the N-word? Is there a word? And do we want to empower any word on television or anywhere with the power to not be spoken, as in Yahweh in the Old Testament? Come on. Anyway, I'm going home and reread Joseph Conrad's The Darky of the Narcissus.
Now, speaking of music, people want to know about your theme song from Candide. How did that come about? Was that a personal thing?
Bobby Rosengarten put together the best band that there ever was, apparently, on television. Now, Severinson's was no slouch, was it, of a band? But one time, my friend Porterfield, who knows jazz, came over during the afternoon. I was rehearsing commercials and said, do you realize who you have sitting over there? And I said, where? And he said, in the band. Bucky Pizzarelli, Tommy, oh God, Milt Hinton, stars of the jazz world, who love a studio job. They don't have to travel. They loved it. The luckiest guy. Every singer, almost without exception, of the dozens, hundreds that I had on, said either on camera or off, that is the greatest band ever. God, I wish I could take them with me. Wow. Ella Fitzgerald, Bob Hope, Groucho, Peggy Lee, whoever it was. That band, Jesus. And Rosengarten knew they were good, and they knew they were good. I missed getting anything into Bob's obituary in the Times because it went one of those things where it transmitted about 30 minutes too late to get in. And I had written a lot of stuff about that band and how it worked. And the thing of why these were such the seasoned musicians that they could do anything just like that. If Bob Hope walked on as a surprise once, he was on a couple times, once it came out, I saw Rosengarten, see him, go, memory in F, da, 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 and everyone came in on the first note in the key of F. Not hard for them, but quite amazing. I remember hoping, hey, they really move memory, don't they?
You mentioned Porterfield. Could you talk a little bit about Chris Porterfield and producing your PBS show and your work with him on your books?
Oh yeah, Chris Porterfield and I met in the Yale dining hall freshman year, and we're mates at Yale and friends ever since. We wrote the book Cavett together. Was a reporter in Minneapolis, went to Time Magazine, rose to executive editor of Time Magazine in retirement. And in the interval, he worked for me for producer for a time, and it was fun having an old friend, as smart as he is, as well. And a friend work on shows. Great. It was wonderful. His ideas were good, and he was not afraid to criticize me. After the Brando show, he explained to me how I should have done it, and he was right. And it was just wonderful. Eventually, when that show ended, he went back to Time. They were glad to get him, and he stayed there for years.
Well, you've done talk shows not only on PBS, but also on cable, USA, CNBC. What are the differences?
That's right.
When you do a show, when you began to do a show on cable television, were there differences for you in the way you approached the show?
Maybe I should have, but I never thought of any of them as different. I go out and do what I do there. If it's in this room, it's at their station, and if it's here, it's on this network. But essentially, I go out and talk to the people and try to make them comfortable and entertaining, and shake them up a little when necessary, and wake them up, and prod them a little. And I like going on other people's shows. John McLaughlin had a show while I was at CNBC, and I went on his show. And that was fun, because you get to see it from the other side. I'm always a good guest on a talk show. This is just a fact, not an opinion. I just know I'm always going to be good because I know how to do it. And it always comes to me at this time, and I always think of plenty of stuff to do, but I can never guarantee that I will host a show well in any given instance. Sometimes, maddeningly, I just don't get it that day. and I don't know why that should be. It was fun with McLaughlin. He stood then, and he was still rather stentorian, I believe is the phrase.
Yeah.
We all think we know what it means without looking it up. And at one point he said, I was seated, he's standing over there, the audience, "You were on the cover of Time magazine, and you were a bit of a prima donna," somebody in the staff said. And I said, "Could you yell that again, John? I wasn't listening." And I got one of the biggest laughs from a studio audience of 8 that I've ever.
Well, talking about
I like McLaughlin. He's a fun.
talking about your other pursuits in television, you appeared on Rowan Martin's Laugh-In, The Odd Couple, playing yourself. Just what were those experiences?
Was I on Laugh-In? I have seen that several times, and I don't remember that. I know that I was on Kate and Alley, and I have no memory of having been on Kate and Alley. And this may have had to do with serotonin levels. I'm not sure. But I know, luckily, it wasn't the great Sid Caesar's problem, who in his alcohol years made a movie in Australia. His entire memory of the experience was boarding a plane and one sunset. And when he saw the film, he had no memory of ever being in any of it. I haven't, but I had minor versions of that. I can't figure out what I must have done on Kate and Alley. Maybe you can find out if I was on, and I'll feel better if I wasn't. I love being on Cheers and
How about hosting Saturday Night
The
Live?
Odd Couple and stuff.
How about hosting Saturday Night Live?
That was fun and scary, hosting Saturday Night Live. It was at the beginning when the old cast, the original old cast, was all still intact, and that was great fun. And I got to play John Dean, and Watergate was still going on in Blonde Ambition, from Blind Ambition.
Well, that was live television,
With
too.
Al Franken doing a perfect vocal duplication of Senator Irvin. Almost and Dan Aykroyd as Nixon. Ooh, how could that have happened? And he played Nixon so broadly and yet so funny that the broadness made it funnier than an exact imitation would be. I remember one line from the sketch. I said, "Mr. President, I can't help noticing on your books there's 4 leather-bound books with the titles Rewind, Fast Forward, Record, and oh, how did that happen?" That was fun.
Now, do you like impersonations of yourself? We talked about Rick Moranis.
It's a funny feeling to see yourself done. Yeah. It's insulting at the same time that it's a compliment. Something wrong with me that they have to imitate me that way? And it's quite spooky. I've never seen the great Darrell Hammond do me, but Rick Moranis did, and he was as close to me as I can get.
And one other format.
We're just doing a show in here. That's all right. Keep yelling.
One other format that you appeared on regularly was game shows. What's My Line?
Oh, I love
Pyramid.
going on the Pyramid.
Yeah. Could you just talk about what is exciting about that for you?
I don't know what it is. It's tension. It's showbiz. It's fast. Money's riding on it if it's the pyramid. And I had a lot of fun with Dick Clark. We would kid each other because he would get, "Aren't you Dick Cavett?" some days, and I would get, "Aren't you Dick Clark?" some days in our life. And I would do what I did to you earlier. Once he said, "Our next lady comes all the way from Florida." And I said, "Dick, yeah. She wouldn't be here if she hadn't come all the way, would she?" And he would get annoyed. I stopped their taping once because I challenged their rejecting one, killing the pyramid for a lady because they mistakenly buzzed my clue. And years later, they admitted it. And I said, "Did you pay the lady?" And they said, "No."
And you've also done educational shows. One of the most interesting shows we have in our collection, Time Was, you did for HBO. Can you talk about
Oh, I just had dinner with Bruce Cohn, the genius who produced 3 HBO series named Time Was, Remember When, and Yesteryear.
Yeah.
And I talked to him about, are those in the museum? Are they in the collection?
Yes.
Are they in the archives? God knows they belong to me. Many people think they're the best things they ever saw on television. And they were vastly entertaining because they were historic in various ways. But they used Ultimat so that I was on the platform with Roosevelt in the second inaugural or whatever. I came ashore with MacArthur, and it looked so real that dummies out there wrote in saying, "How old was Dick when he was at the Roosevelt's?" And in watching it, I'd think, I don't remember standing out there in that field with Mickey Mantle, but I didn't. They faked it.
That's sort of the beginning of Forrest Gump in a way.
Well, and Zelig.
Yeah, and
Woody
Zelig,
Zelig could have been inspired by that.
Yeah.
But those really deserve to be seen again. There are people who recall them in detail to this day. And I don't know what the rights are, what the complications would be of. They should be DVD'd, syndicated.
They're great educational tools.
Just he teaches Bruce out in California, and he uses them, and the students just love them. And letters poured in from educators saying, "God, this is the first time we've had kids get interested in stuff that we could never interest them in before."
And the one other appearances that you have on television is your voice. It's very recognizable, and you've done narration. You've done, I think, some commercials.
It's a mixed blessing because you're walking along the sidewalk and somebody steps on your foot, and you say, "What the hell are you doing, you dumb bastard? Can't you walk?" And they, "Oh, Dick Cavett." I say, "Oh, yeah." But your voice is very recognizable. "I can speak on the telephone in the voice of the British governess, and sometimes I succeed in getting away with it, but not always." Curious thing. I had a deep voice as a little kid, and it gave me a kind of theatrical presence because I would sit in the back of a room where there was a meeting of some sort, and I was the kid in the back, and I'd ask a question, and other people asked questions too, but when I did, everybody turned to see what was making that sound. And they would see me and reject me as the possible source of it because I was like that. I guess I talked early. So my mother loved to tell about taking me on a train from Gibbon to Grand Island, a big train trip for me at the age of 1, and in her arms, of course, and the conductor said, "How old is the baby?" And the baby said, "He will be 2 in November." And he was nonplussed. He thought she was a ventriloquist. It could not have been the infant who spoke. Those were my first known words, "He will be 2 in November." It doesn't actually rank quite with Dr. Samuel Johnson's, who burned his mouth as a little tiny boy at the table. And after a while someone said, "Sammy, is it better?" And he said, "The discomfort is somewhat abated."
Now, we've been talking about your talk shows from the 70s, but now in this new century, they have great historical importance. They appear on TCM.
Yeah.
Did you ever conceive of them as historical documents that will be played and replayed?
Never, no. When I went downstairs and just happened to catch Fred Astaire rehearsing a 20-minute medley of Gershwin and Cole Porter with my great band, who were so happy to be playing with him. And I thought this might have historic importance. And he danced on that show long after retiring. And you learn things that are nice little widgets or bits you can put into conversation at dull moments at cocktail parties in later life, like the fact that I did a wonderful pair of shows on the PBS show with songwriters.
Right.
And I had, which is the live of Howard Dietz and Schwartz at that time, Arthur Schwartz, Sammy Kahn, Alan J. Lerner, Paul Simon, and somebody else. And during the talk about songs and Tin Pan Alley and movies and singers' television specials and so on and so on, showing off that I had read a little bit from preparation for the show, I said, I know there was a time when just what every songwriter lived for was only one person to record his song, Fred Astaire. Let me back up.
Yeah.
Because I may have blown a line there for you. It was Sammy Kahn that I was talking with, and I said, I know that from reading that every songwriter lived for the dream of maybe getting Frank Sinatra to record his song. Then he was made. And he said, this is true. During a break between the 2 half hours, he said, called me over and said, I wasn't totally honest with you maybe there, but because his career was Frank Sinatra.
Right.
He said, there is one person whose musicality was considered as great and perhaps greater than Frank's. And I thought, well, Frank liked various singers that he would praise over the years. I couldn't think who it would be. He said Fred Astaire. Fred Astaire. And I did the usual take that people often do. Some will say, I didn't even know he was he ever sang. Well, of course he sang in all those movies. But people think of him for his dazzling, greatest dancer in the world. The only thing Rudolf Nureyev insisted on talking about when he came on was Fred Astaire. That was his hero in the world. Astaire's musical abilities, not a great voice, he never pretended it was, but if you listen to his singing, greater than Frank.
And you have the...
Certainly Frank, I always called him Frank, of course, was the great pop singer of all time.
Now, did you ever try to get him on your show?
Yes.
And why did he not?
I don't know. First I called once and some hood answered the phone. I said, I don't know who the hell you are, and because he was not always meticulous in his choice of friends and associates, and yet I would do anything for him. And I met him a number of times, and we mentioned it a couple times, and I think I didn't push it hard enough because we would have had such a good time out there.
Or there are people...
Cary Grant.
Right.
Same thing. I almost got Cary Grant, I guess, and I didn't push hard enough on that. Oh, Dick, they'll find out how dumb I am, he said in all seriousness. Mr. Grant, you can only be so dumb.
Now, you're also releasing DVDs of these historic shows. How do you choose the topics and people that you're going to release?
The DVDs came about partly because for years people said everybody else has DVDs out and how come you don't? And I always said, I don't know. And eventually, in the passive voice, the DVDs got made. It wasn't really the driving force. I thought they'd be excerpts from the shows, like some of the others are. Like for Johnny, they can take a Rickles spot and something, make a nice collage of stuff. But these are the entire shows. They're in 5 sets, rock icons, which is who's who,
Right.
and talking, that's the important part, they all talk. People would say, we loved seeing Janis sing on Hullabaloo and shows, but we always wanted to know what she was like. Well, her personality was the whole thing. The rock show, there's a great one with Ray Charles, because he did the show 5 times. On the first one, you can see that he's still on drugs, and he's clean on the later ones. It's interesting to watch that. John and Yoko,
Right.
2 shows.
You have a comedy.
Comedians.
Yes.
Yeah. And then there's one called Hollywood Greats, which, tell me if you think we may have given away too much. The entire shows of Katharine Hepburn, Betty Davis, Groucho Marx, Woody Allen, Mel Brooks, Lucille Ball, Fred Astaire, Marlon Brando, Orson Welles, John Huston, Ingmar Bergman, Lucille Ball, did I mention? And 2 or 3 more. Robert Mitchum is wonderful on that. The Groucho is worth the price of a year's tuition at Harvard.
Well, it's
Everything he said was funny for the entire show. He was in it the last of his prime that night. And I got a letter. Here's what makes it worth going through all the hell of doing television. And I got a letter from Groucho's daughter, Miriam, this year. Thank you, Mr. Cavett, for something I should have thanked you for 20 years ago. then you wrote an introduction to my dad's book called Love Groucho. It was a collection of his letters to her when she was a college student. She was away at school. And he was a born writer and witty writer, and they're wonderful. And I wrote the introduction. The publisher didn't do much with it, as you publishers are known to do. Anyway, I want to thank you. I was drunk for 15 of those years, she said. She's a valuable, confessing, recovering alcoholic who knows what it's really like. And in the letter, as I was reading it, my eye dropped several lines to the line that said, "My father thought the world of you." It gets me now.
Now, do you consider that one of your proudest achievements, that your talk shows now are out there on DVD? There are...
Well, I'm glad they're there.
Right.
The great Camille Paglia, who assaulted me violently in print recently for a piece I wrote about Sarah Palin, called The Wild Wordsmith of Wasilla, first complimented me in her piece. She softened me up by talking about the shows, and she said that those shows will not be surpassed in the terms of talking to great people and so on and so on. And she may be right. I never had that in mind. All I ever thought of from minute to minute was getting through this. But the people who now see the DVDs and want their kids to see them will say, you know, there was a show once where you talked for a long time and it seemed like a short time, and people did a whole show without plugging anything. Now a production meeting for a talk show, and was when I was on the Tonight Show, was, what's she plugging? Okay, now Dom, we got him. Now what's he's plugged on for 2 segments? What's he plugging? And when he plug, and if you aren't plugging anything, what are you doing on the show? See, has long been a philosophy. It's not modern.
Because other DVDs of talk shows are struggling because they're not really conversations and their excerpts are not complete interviews. But yours is the only one to be the way it was seen.
I have not seen the others. I've seen their infomercials.
Yeah.
The company that did mine had a man named Rob Bader, who watched, I think he said, 350 Cavett shows before he had to stop and start making DVDs out of them. And he did a brilliant job. The company did a crappy job of promoting them, and so I'm going to get them back from them. Right. It's too bad they crumbled on that side, because I've given them to people who said, God, if I'd known these were out, I'd have given them everybody for Christmas. There's a great deal of pleasure in them for people who don't know there is such a thing.
And your career now has sort of come full circle. You're back writing again, blogging for the New York Times.
Isn't that funny? I am, aren't I?
Yeah. Could you just talk about that experience now on the internet? And
somebody said, do you want to write 2 columns a week for the month of August for the Times a year and something ago? And I said, well, I don't know, Ken, is that possible? And it's hard to do 2 columns a week. I don't know how anybody does that. But I did it for a month, and at first it was easier than it would be, because I had lots of stuff. I could do a column on Groucho, and people would say, do another one on Groucho, and I'd do another one. And I could do one on this and that. And, after a year, it starts getting to be almost penal servitude if you're not careful, which daily column I would think would be for anybody. But I enjoy it, and there's a kick from writing. It's getting your lines quoted to you and hearing people say it affected me, or I laughed out loud at your Sarah column. I had 2 columns on depression, which saved some lives. As you can see in the letters that follow. All these columns, by the way, are still available on New York Times Opinion, or New York Times Opinion Cavett will take you there. The 2 on depression, people in the letters, which could be emails, which appear there, you can read them right. People talk to each other in them. A woman said, I'm going to commit suicide, and nothing has worked for me, and so on and so on. And you realize that there's hardly anybody who has had depression, had a wife or child have it or die of it, a suicide, or a relative or something, or realize that that's what is wrong with someone they know and love and can't figure out what it is. And as when talking about it on television and Larry King and other things, you get, you saved my dad. he decided when he heard you talk about this, it's all right for Cavett to have it, it's all right for me to have it, and he turned himself in. And the woman in the column's going to commit suicide got a note later down the line in the letters, so a woman saying, I'm a nurse, don't do it, I'll get in touch with you, that kind of thing. So that's...
Right. So where do you think the talk show is today? We have a few minutes left. Where would you put the talk show today? And what would you tell an aspiring talk show, a young Dick Cavett today, how to break into the business?
I think the talk show stayed pretty much the same in terms of format, and I think it's the right one, and it's pretty much the Tonight Show format. And every time I was on ABC, they'd say, how's the new show going to be new and different? And I'd say, well, the guests are going to stand. Well, do you think that's a good idea? You know, it's not going to be new and different, folks. As Marshall Brickman wittily said, oh, another square painting? You know, I mean, the form is there. So some of them are good and some of them are crappy. And it will ever be thus.
So I have one question here. I don't know if you've ever asked this, but how
I
would you
think
like
we're out of film or tape.
How would you like to be remembered?
Are we on tape or film?
Out of tape.
Oh, well, okay, so we won't.
We're out of tape?